In March of 2021, leading South African private healthcare provider Netcare, in partnership with Standard Bank, listed the continent's first sustainability-linked bond on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Netcare, together with Standard Bank, raised 1 billion rand, a 3-year unsecured note through the bond that will enable the healthcare group to fulfill its sustainability objectives of reducing its carbon footprint by procuring more renewable energy and further improving its water efficiency, amongst its other SDG-linked objectives. The Sustainable Development Goals Center for Africa and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network published the 2020 edition of the Africa SDG Index, and according to the analysis of the current status and trends towards achieving the SDGs, SDG 13, which looks at climate action, is the only goal for most African countries which is on track. And SDG 12, looking at responsible consumption and production, is also an area of better performance for Africa overall. Now, decoupling economic growth from resource regeneration is a call to action and a strategic approach to a greener and more sustainable Africa economy. Proudly hosted by PPC, our discussion today will highlight the strategic and systematic changes that need to occur at a macro and a microeconomic level required in the advancement of decoupling resource consumption from economic growth. We also take a glance at the role of impact enveloped in SDGs, the UN Global Compact and ESG, and its imperative design in carrying out sustainable practices and innovation. And we critically engage the guarantee of the stabilization of resource and energy consumption and its imprint, as well as how economies across the continent are participating in this endeavor. But before we do that, here's a word from our sponsor, PPC, in this conversation.
Our heritage on the African continent has taught us one thing. If we want to build fast, we can build alone. If we want to build stronger buildings that stand the test of time, we must build with those who call Africa home. Building beyond the needs of our current environment to unlock the potential that gives PPC its unrelenting optimism. We remain an integral part of the growth ambition across Africa's construction and built environment, as well as fostering an innovative culture to strengthen the category into the future. PPC is invested in building a stronger Africa. We know what it means to empower a community to experience a better quality of life. We have seen the African sky shine brighter every time a new structure has touched the ground. We have witnessed the growth of families and communities through the development and empowerment of entrepreneurs. We are scientifically informed, 100% local production. We are unrelenting in the manufacturing of premium quality products. We embody the hopes and dreams of all who call Africa home. We understand what an Africa built by Africans means. It is a place where dreams to build a stronger continent can be realized without the threat of substandard workmanship and product in homes, schools, clinics, and the roads that connect us. This dream of building a stronger Africa is not only for the ones that answer the call to build, but for anyone who looks optimistically to the horizon and believes that we can create the future we desire. Join the journey today and realize what it means to build stronger with PPC. Building stronger communities, building stronger businesses, building stronger schools, building stronger roads. PPC, building a stronger Africa.
Now, this discussion is led by thought leaders across multiple sectors who will be engaging with us with a multitude of expansive expertise to answer and navigate this question at bay. In Zambia, we're joined by Snowden Mmadi, the infrastructure expert at the African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD. Snowden, welcome to the conversation. In South Africa, we are joined by Rachel Rachel Chikwamba, the Group Executive for Chemicals, Agriculture, Food and Health at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. Rachel, we very much look forward to your engagement. And rounding off our panel discussion is Professor Adrian Saval, the Director at the Center for African Management and Markets at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Thank you all for joining us today, and we definitely look forward to a meaningful discussion. As we open up the floor and invite your reflections to open up this discussion, when we look at the task at hand of decoupling, it will take a couple of strategic approaches across policies, across capacities and our capabilities, across technologies as well. And I'm really interested in your reflections in the immediate response to this environment that we find ourselves in across the continent. And I suppose, Snowden, I'll start with you from an infrastructure lens in terms of how we are looking at the current moment.
Thank you very much, Vuyo, and greetings to the fellow colleagues on the panel. First of all, I think let me start to respond to your question by looking at why is it that we are talking about decoupling. I'll present, I think, just about 5 factors as to the reasons why I feel it is necessary to decouple. First, you may have come across, or maybe when you're undertaking some of the projects, either it be domestic projects or even projects at home, that the demand for raw materials is increasing. And that's a fact. The second item is that approximately 80% of the consumer goods and materials are thrown away. Thirdly, 30% of all processed foods goes into the West. Immediately, they hit the supply chain. And 10%, if I talk of 10%, let me just maybe put it a little bit higher. 20% of occupancy in cars in Africa. If you're going to work today, the question that I'll put across is to say, how many of you were in that car? It's a 5-seater car, most likely, but how many of you were there in the car? Most probably there was 1, if not 2. And finally, 10 to 15% of the materials in construction go to West. This calls to this particular discussion, which is very pertinent, as to why do we need to decouple our economic growth by solely depending on the natural resources that we have. So the African Union Development Agency, as most of the stakeholders might have noted, or most of the stakeholders do complain, is that most of the regional economic communities, international bodies are always talking, developing policies which are never implemented. Out of this particular problem, then NEPAD was transformed to African Union Development Agency with the sole objective of implementing policies which have been developed at the continental level. And to this particular subject that we're discussing today, the African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD, has developed its strategic plan for 2020 to 2023. And out of this strategic plan, there are 7 key priority areas. Suffice to say that out of these 7, 4 of these priority areas are looking at the environment. And that is, I will only mention about these 4 only. We're looking at the human and institutional development to catalyst. We are looking at sustainable energy. We are looking at climate resilience, environment and natural resources management. And we are looking at science, technology, and innovation as being some of the factors that will help us in decoupling from the use of natural resources as we try to grow our economies. So just to cover up on the infrastructure arena part of it, to implement these programs, the heads of states from the continent agreed to have a program which we call PIDA. PIDA stands for the Program of Infrastructure Development in Africa. This program looks at all the sectors of infrastructure. We are looking at how the ICTs can be developed. We are looking at the transport sector. In the transport sector, we are both looking at all kinds of transport, looking at rail, looking at roads, we are looking at maritime, and we are looking at air transport. And as we are looking at these modes of transport, the core theme behind it is making sure that we're having sustainable transport systems. We also are looking at the energy components. We're looking at getting energy from where energy is being produced efficiently. We are looking at promoting green energy. We are looking at promoting renewable energy. We're also looking at water utilization. So just to sum it up, the African continent is now on the move, making sure that we are using our resources optimally and making sure that we are saving for the generation to come. Thank you so much for your.
Absolutely. I love the point of Africa being on the move. And of course, later on, we will be unpacking the strategic plan as well as PIDA and how these initiatives and these strategies will be important in how we understand and we move to your point. Rachel, I'm going to bring you into this, and particularly in your opening remarks, I want you to speak to technology. And it being a regenerative resource and how we could actually move ahead to being a greener and a profitable continent. Rachel, you are on mute. I suppose it wouldn't be a virtual discussion if that wasn't the case.
So my apologies for making that very layman mistake, but it is an absolute pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists today, to be having this conversation with you. And my opening remarks build on something that Snowden has said, which speaks to how Africa, focusing on Africa as such, is a very resource-intensive, extractive-based set of economies. And in fact, the problem is most of the resources are extracted and exported with very little beneficiation and value add. And in fact, very little of those resources remain on the continent as local stock for us to use to build our own economies. And even when we do build our own economies, the resource consumption patterns are very linear. And we would want, in the conversation of decoupling, to be able to say, how do we make these linear extractive value chains and resource flows a little bit greener and a little bit more secular? But in order for us to have that particular conversation, I think that we need to address the issue of maximum local beneficial use of resources in support of the continent's own socio-economic development. So the whole idea of how we can use tech to add value to our natural resources to build our own local economies, and doing it in such a manner that we enable ourselves to cycle a lot of the resources and they don't go to waste. I think Snowden mentioned something that's really very important when he then says, you know, once these things are extracted, about 80% of it goes back to waste. It goes back to the landfill. It goes back to emissions. It goes back to really then making us not exactly as climate smart as we ought to be. So I want to tackle that. And in conversation, I want to also talk about how we can speak a lot more to reinventing our relationship with resources, where we need to start thinking about creating a sharing economy. Snowden spoke about the whole idea that think about transportation. We think of it as each must have their own car. Could we change that mindset and say we could have a rideshare type of thing using business models that are enabled by ICT and digitalization to start to do and think about things differently? Within the context of our own developing countries, then looking at, and which is a perspective that I will look through this conversation from, and the lens through which I will look this conversation from, which is that at the CSIR, we are about developing technologies right now to drive industrial development, but also a capable state. So I would like to talk about how we have used some of those technologies to drive industrial development as we see it, and to bring competitiveness into our sectors through a lens that then says, how do we think about sustainability and being green and so on? And so for us, we do take a very systematic approach to say, when we look at our economies, how do we look at the ones that are most likely to make an impact on economic growth and competitiveness from a lens of impact and attractiveness, and how we then bring technology, the ease of influence to bring competitiveness to that sector through tech. We then go through a process where we then say, if we look at those sectors that we prioritize, how then do we analyze what technologies are out there? And we've been having a buzz lately, since this is Tech Week, I think it is appropriate, on the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. So we talk about 4IR, from biotech to human language technologies, to ICT, to 3D printing, to all sorts of precision lasers and other technologies that we can bring into our basket of innovation to say, how do we, in a green manner, bring competitiveness to these sectors? Benchmarking, of course, with how the leaders in tech have used technologies to decouple the manner in which we perform our industrial development, extract resources, use them, convert them to product, to make sure that then we do it in such a manner that we can regenerate the resource and we can minimize our global footprint. And in that regard, we systematically come to strategies of how we then use tech to drive a greener economy. So I do have quite a few case studies, but I'll be unpacking those in the next part of our conversation. Thank you, Vuyo.
Absolutely, and I think we cannot wait to hear about, to your point, the impact attractiveness of technology and how we engage with that through the transition of decoupling. Adrian, I am going to you, Professor, and looking at in your engagement with the various African economies and multiple stakeholders that you do engage in and engage with at GIBS. What is your response and I suppose your reflections on the current immediate environment, which would henceforth enable us to decouple for the future and the present?
Thanks, Vuyo. It's great to be with you. And I think that there's a couple of aspects to highlight just as jump-off points. The first is referencing a recent panel discussion that I was part of, talking about the Build Back Better movement or proposal that, post-COVID, we've got a chance to build back better, and references there are to sustainability, efficiency, economies and resource use, and so on. My complaint or my objection to that is that if this is a reference to Pan-African economies, we're not building back better. These haven't been built in the first instance. And so there is an extraordinary opportunity to build here brand new and to build, if we're going to stay with the alliteration, to build brilliantly. And that's about bringing in efficiencies, economies, innovations that ensure that we design systems and solutions that are decoupled. And why would this be important? Well, the African population is a little over 1 billion people, which makes us equivalent in size to perhaps India or China, with a little over 1 billion population each. But the African economy is, from a per person perspective, is substantial. It is an economic giant of the future. If we follow the resource intensity path that has been followed by Asian economies from the 1990s in particular, you've seen Asian economies enjoy substantial gains in per person income, improvements in human development indices, and all of these belong to the collective ambition of Africa's 55 countries. However, over the past 30 years, resource consumption in Asian economies has increased by a factor of three times. So there is this massive step up in the use of resources, resource intensity. You've got some particularly sort of standout examples. Mongolia is a case in point, which has a very, very inefficient use of resources. And if we were to take this as evidence of how we might develop over the next 20 or 30 years, and then I would bring us back to progress that is happening in the African context with the likes of Rwanda, Ethiopia, running along with 7, 8, 9% economic growth. Not as impressive, but still very robust. You've got Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, putting down 4 and 5% economic growth. Aggregate this, and we're talking about populations of hundreds of millions of people who will build higher consumption patterns with urbanization, Snowden's world, infrastructure development that parallels this urbanization. And then as the middle class bulges, you get consumption patterns that are energy and resource intensive. So part of this build back or build for the first time, here is a chance for us to do things very, very differently. I think the positive in this, Rachel spoke about innovations, and I imagine that she will speak about microeconomic innovations. There are also macroeconomic innovations. Right. And perhaps when we come back to talk about the potential paths, I think both of these can be pursued. That from a microeconomic perspective, it's about innovation at the level of the company, at the level of communities, and at macroeconomic, it's we can learn from other countries. And as much as I'm complaining about Asian economies that have built these very resource inefficient pathways, there are examples that we can learn from in the same cluster, country cluster or regional cluster. Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and more recently Thailand have all shown ways in which you can build substantial gains in per capita income and do it decoupling from resource use to build on the theme of this conversation. So we don't have to invent this. We can borrow and learn and build from the platform that has been established by others.
Absolutely. Well, a stellar statement, Prof. And I think to Rachel's sentiment around building better relationships that we have with resources to the sharing economy. And we certainly will be coming back to the point around the list of these innovations, right? And I think what's going on across the continent. And to Prof's point around going back to Snowden's world, Snowden, I'm going to come back to you, particularly from the macroeconomics of it. And earlier on, you pointed to the 7 points of the strategic plan, but I really want you to speak to the 4 and the intensity of those, especially when the development agency is advising on really key strategic decisions and decision makers who are part of that conversation.
Thank you very much, Vio, for bringing me back to the initial conversation, specifically on the policy arena. You know, one of the challenges that we have in the continent is the abject poverty that the continent faces. And combined with the abject poverty and also the political will, they sometimes seem to be a mismatch on what the political arena would be looking for in terms of convincing its own electorate and then putting across what I would call painful policies. Still, as AUDA-NEPAD, our role is to advise and make sure that we're doing good for the continent. I'm putting across this particular point because for us to remain a continent that is sustainable and we are not depleting our resources for the generation to come, we need to put in place some policies which are going to be a little bit painful. I'm looking at part of let's just look at an example of the road transport that we've talked about. If you look at the cars that are plying trade on the roads of the continent, most of these cars, one, they're either not built in Africa. Two, most of these cars are brought in as second-hand cars, and that is coming out from the unaffordability of brand new cars and the abject poverty that the continent has. It doesn't mean that the continent is poor. The continent is very rich, and it's one of the richest continents in the world, but we just need to use our resources properly and effectively. So as a policy making mechanism, and what the AUDA-NEPAD is also advocating, is to make sure that policies are put in place that will address this particular challenge of the environment. The unfortunate part in a globalized, in a global economy, on a globalized world, the challenge is that the Western world is talking of something else. Africa is also talking of something else. There's so many agreements which have been put in place, but when you look at addressing the challenge of pollution and making our environments clean, you find out all these second-hand cars are coming out from Europe. And where they're coming from, it's very expensive for them to be driven. However, they come to Africa and we're using them. So we need to put in place these particular policies, which are very difficult, they're very painful, but they were good for the generation to come. So as a policy making part of it, AUDA-NEPAD is involved in conducting research and development. And in the research and development, it is now research-based evidence that is helping us in terms of crafting the policies that are advanced at the EU level. So I'm just going to speak on that one, just to highlight that particular point, that one particular painful item that we need to put on the fore is that of making painful policies that will address some of the challenges that we're having to decouple the use of reliance of the natural resources in advancing our economic growth. So let me just pause in there. I think you allowed me to be coming in and off as my colleagues are also be contributing on the same subject, so that I critically highlight some of the issues on the infrastructure part of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think a critical point to what you brought was definitely the political will that should match the abject poverty that Africa really lives on, and the mandate of the agency being quite clear in not only providing the knowledge-based advisory services, but also acting as the continent's technical interface on policy development, recommendation, as well as the implementation. Dr. Rachel, I'm going to come to you and mention something that Snowden slightly touched on, but that is the R&D lens of it, right? The research and development that has been taking place, and perhaps if you could speak to the CSIR's initiative on how driving profitability through tech is definitely greener and profitable as well.
Thank you very much. And I want to build also on something that Adrian says to begin this part of the conversation, where we say that we need interventions and innovation at the macro level and also at the micro level. And so I hope that I can connect the things that we do when we think about the role of innovation at the macro level through obviously this systematic analysis of the sectors that will bring economic growth to the country, the ones where we have a lot of employment multipliers, all those job creation I've spoken to, backward and forward linkages in order to enhance growth, and. We go through this very systematically and we say, these are in fact the priority sectors as we see them, to include, of course, health and education. And then we go in there and then we say, what is the role of tech in addressing the pain points in each of these particular sectors? And then we then say, how do we start to apply with our industrial partners some of these technological applications and innovations to try and improve performance? So if I could give an example, I want to talk about an example that starts from the raw material all the way to a highly competitive industry where we want to build a larger share of these high value industries for South African economies, for the South African and African economies, if you think about it, in a manner that is sustainable. So I want to talk about the work that we do to support advanced manufacturing industries, and these will include things such as automotive, aerospace, and defense. And these industries rely a lot on very specialized parts. And so we've done work to try and bring value addition to raw materials that Africa is endowed on, is really very richly endowed with. The example that I will cite is the one of titanium, where we have the bulk, over 80% of the natural resource material of titanium raw sands. And what we're trying to do here is we have developed some very original technologies to allow us to convert that raw sands into titanium metal. The challenge that we're facing right now is one that I spoke about, the very extractive effort of taking out the raw sands, exporting them without beneficiation, and then importing the metal parts, the metal when processed, so that we can build parts for aircraft, for automotive, for health applications, among others. So what we've done is to develop such technologies and such proprietary technology to locally convert those raw materials into metal so that we achieve that maximum beneficiation that I was talking about. As a step further to that, we're trying to really build these particular industries, and we're saying, can we do it in such a manner that we minimize waste? So we've developed technologies around taking that metal powder, using 3D printing aerospace parts. And in fact, we can very proudly say that at the CSIR here in South Africa, we have one of the largest original printers, that 3D printers that can build whole parts for aircraft, supporting the likes of Aeroseed and Denelo and others that are in the aerospace sector. We use this technology as well to then, and let me perhaps speak to the regenerative and perhaps greener part dimension to this conversation, which is that instead of creating metal, create a metal billet, and then you chisel away and waste to create a part. We print the parts with such precision that there is no waste. And we feel that this is beginning to become the basis of a highly competitive industry that is of high value to the South African economy. And we can grab a little more of those high value global chains when we do that. So we start from beneficiation. We use with original patented technology. We go into the whole idea of process innovation, where we say, can we do this in such a build parts in such a manner that we don't waste any resource or any of these materials, all the way to saying, can we start through this process to build highly competitive industries that compete on a global scale. So this is one basket of technologies that we can talk about with 3D printing and so on in dealing with the issue of beneficiation. I can cite some other technologies that are different. I want to shift away from those advanced industries to something that we do in agriculture, focusing on precision agriculture, where we use our Earth observation capabilities all the way to drones to develop really Earth observation tools that allow us to drill down into the manner in which we farm, where we look at the different crop types, and then we can then say, as we assess that crop type, we start to see issues of water and hydration, issues of soil and soil facility, and to provide on a weekly basis and making it even closer to a daily basis, actionable decision-making information to the farmers and farmer associations to then say, how do they respond by precisely bringing water to the plants without wasting the water? How do they precisely fertilize the soil without over-fertilizing the soil and
draining fertilizers into the waterways and, leading to eutrophication of our waterways. And. So those are the types of technologies that we deal with. And we believe that it is through many of these innovations that we can actually bring green approaches to economic development. We have a lot of things that we do in the energy space, and I have a whole set of ideas to expand there is a later part of the conversation. But for me, the way that we're looking at this is to say, how do we use technology to maximally beneficiate resources, number one, to use them efficiently so that we minimize the things that we send to the Western landfills and so on. One of our key technologies that we are also very proud of is the work that we do in biopolymers, where we're looking to say, can we start to develop polymers that are recyclable for the plastics industry so that we don't send everything to the landfill again and it doesn't degrade very, very readily. So I could cite many examples where we begin to say, how do we look at our industries and start to say, how do we use technology to bring that green dimension to the manner in which we make our economies competitive. Adrian said that our economies are yet to be built. I'd like to believe that we have the building blocks that we need to build these economies. Innovation is a great part, and tech is a great part of how we do that building. And these specific examples that we're citing, we are taking to the sectors where we work with the likes of the DTIC, which is our Department of Technology and Industry, to say, how do we bring sector level transformation by bringing these technologies on board? Where we have conversations with the like of our departments of science and innovation to say, in our white paper on innovation, how do we build into the innovation discourse the idea that technology can allow us to become greener even as we strive to build our economies. Yeah. So we don't follow the paths that the likes of other countries that use the resource path to development. We can chart our own course. Absolutely. Building on technologies, learning from them, but of course, avoiding the pitfalls that they had when they did their own thing. So I'll pause here because I'm sure I'm not the only panelist to talk about this, but I do have more examples that we can speak to.
Absolutely, and I think such concrete and excellent examples from advanced tech to the circular economy, of course, looking at good agricultural practices and biotech to the work that CSIR is doing. And Adrian, I'm going to invite you into this conversation as well, and expanding to your earlier point around the touch points of African economies, and really looking at minimizing the waste, creating not only high value but shared value. And perhaps if you could look at the undertakings that have been happening and some findings to support this conversation, and perhaps to put you on the spot here as well on how an agreement like the Africa Trade Agreement could definitely tighten this argument and the trade from a beneficial perspective to Rachel's point, and how it can benefit the Africa economy.
You know, Vuyo, I think that last point that you raise is particularly interesting because there is a global policy thrust drive to evidence initiatives that are that show improvements in resource intensity, material use, and so on. And one way of achieving really good domestic consumption footprints is by importing resource-intensive goods, and that shows then that your domestic economy has been able to achieve high levels of consumption without drawing on high levels of domestic resources. So there's ways that you can play a policy game here, and so I think the jump-off point for me in responding is that any approach that we adopt here has to be holistic. It has to recognize that solutions cannot be assessed on a country-by-country or case-by-case basis. And if there are people who are gaming the agenda or who know how to shift the rules to present a better face, then it's exactly that. They've gamified policy. So my urging would be about an holistic approach. A second thing that you make me think of is that when we look at the progression of countries, it is the case that as countries push higher in human development indices, that tends to correspond with urbanization, with infrastructure, and with higher levels of consumption. However, and I've made the point, but I think it really needs to be emphasized, is that we have many country cases, examples where countries, entire populations have generated substantial gains in human development indices without equivalent gains in material consumption. Singapore is arguably the standout example. South Korea is another good example. China, having put down decades of extraordinary growth, has actually become particularly attuned to the importance of this decoupling and their obligation to ensure that growth does not come at the expense of inefficiencies and waste, and at the expense of unsustainable or at the price of unsustainable growth. That isn't the case for everyone. Vietnam, for instance, has gone in the wrong direction. So Laos is another example. So what can we learn from those that have put down very functional and effective pathways, and what can we also learn from those that have misstepped? And in an ideal world, we will be able to import those functional, sort of linear, smooth transitions that mean that we couple gains in economic performance with human development indices, whilst decoupling that with energy, resource use, the environment, and so on. If we take lessons from some of these countries that I've referenced, and I realize that I'm sort of talking around your point, but hopefully this contributes to the conversation. There's a number of sort of real standout principles that we can learn from these other countries. And the first is that this has to be a national agenda, that this can't be piecemeal or fragmented, adopted by one but not adopted by the other. It's got to be a national initiative. The second is there needs to be means and mechanisms to monitor and to evaluate and to manage compliance with those national agendas. And so that talks then about the 30,000 feet, the overarching macroeconomic policy framework, creating the imperative and the initiative, and then having the capacity to monitor and manage. In good economic fashion, I'm going to bring in my howevers, though, and say the however. And if we're talking about the Pan-African context, we know that one of the big challenges in measuring and monitoring is the absence of information. And so, Rachel, here's a great place where we can innovate, right? Where we can build systems for measuring, which then allows for the management and monitoring. And that's about information and data. And through that, we can then achieve the outcomes of resource efficiency, improvements in utilization, improvements in footprints, in material footprints, and so on. And then into that, adapt and adopt, which would include things such as effective waste management, recycling, reuse, and so on. And this really goes back to the points that Snowden was making about, in the food channel, for instance, from factory to mouth, 50% of food is lost. I mean, that's just a spectacularly inefficient use of resources. What can we do that ensures that we don't follow that same path? He also made reference to the wastage of materials in construction. He spoke about 15 and 20% materials, loss of materials in construction. What can we do that is different? And I think the elegance of learning from these other countries is that those are adoptable. And then at the microeconomic level, I'll make this my last point, we've got fantastic stuff like Jugaad Innovation, which is street level innovation, or Zhaolan Fu, the Oxford academic. She's done some fantastic work on African innovation under the radar. And these are real sort of on the ground examples of innovations that are grown to solve to borrow from the throwaway, to solve, African problems with African solutions.
Solving African problems with African solutions. I think what we've done is really created this foundation and laying this foundation of understanding what decoupling is, and of course through a showcase of some regenerative resources that can be implemented to ensure that economic growth is the output and the outcome of such endeavors. Rachel, I'm going to come back to you on long-term recovery, right? And I think as we talk to impact, as we talk to monitoring, evaluating, accountability, and the learning and development of it, there's an interesting concept of the energy mix that plays into this conversation. Briefly unpack this to us and how CSIR is engaging.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And in fact, I think that Adrian gave me a very nice segue to go into this topic, where he was looking for evidence and data. And I want to say very quickly at a very high level, institutions in South Africa are really, really modeling resource flows very accurately, I would like to believe, in our country. And we are part of that particular effort. And I'm looking forward to a time when we will release our publications on the circular economy for business and the circular economy for a capable state, which will inform policy. But moving on to the particular subject that we're speaking about now, the CSIR is also involved quite deeply in making contributions because of our energy modeling capabilities, our abilities to look at the different components of the energy mix and then say what could be the ideal mix for South Africa. So we do contribute to the integrated resource plan, which is driven by the Ministry of Minerals and Energy. But moving quickly to the topic that you have asked me to speak to specifically, Vuyo. Speaking about industrial development and energy and economic development and uncoupling speaks to we need energy that is priced and that has a stable and predictable price trajectory, supporting long-term investments in decision-making where energy input costs have significant impact on investment decisions. We need that stable supply that matches the demand. But most importantly, we need to increase sustainability using sustainable-based renewable energy with low and or declining carbon intensity so that the carbon border taxes and carbon taxes do not erode the competitiveness of our industries. I was talking to a colleague who was speaking to actually how now internationally where we export, you would go into a supermarket and find they do put energy footprints of the various products and consumers are voting with their feet. And to address this challenge, I think that there are so many things that we could potentially do to maximize the incorporation of these particular renewable energies into our mix. For example, we need access to climate finances to accelerate the implementation of renewable energy and that just transition from fossil fuels. We need to be levering the rapidly decreasing costs of renewable energy and energy storage to electrify Africa through a combination of grid, mini-grid, and off-grid solutions. We need to be really leveraging Africa's diversity in renewable energy resources, including solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal, and this can be done while responsibly utilizing fossil fuel resources, and in particular transitional fuels like natural gas to complement the renewable energy deployment. We've got considerable mineral assets, and the value chain for the manufacturing of the emerging new technologies includes things like advanced batteries and fuel cell technologies and so on. So not only to extract these things unsustainably, but say, how do we extract them with a view to drive renewable energy sources? We all know about the heartbreaking stories around the mining of cobalt across the continent, and there is issues of child labor, there is issues of many unsustainable practices to drive the development of chips or something like this in industries that are outside of our own continent. We really, really need to address this. We need to look at the deployment of advanced demand-side management and energy efficiency in industrial processes to reduce end-use demand. And in fact, one of the initiatives that we have at the CSIR with UNIDO is one in which we go into industries sector by sector, look at their operations and their factory layout and how they run their plants, to say, how do we maximize energy and water use efficiency therein. We look at the deployment of embedded energy supply and storage solutions within the industrial plants and the industrial parks with a view to reduce costs, to reduce emissions, and to increase supply availability. And we need to start talking about the development and implementation of new business models of shared ownership and operation of power generation, and the wheeling of power to multiple off-takers in a manner that drives investment in the new energy infrastructure to support industrial development. And then lastly, perhaps I want to highlight the export of green hydrogen and green hydrogen products to the region to support the work that we do in the renewable energy space and leveraging industrial development that would support such large-scale production and will stimulate the inclusion in local manufacturing of such energy sources and really change and transform the value chains to build and maintain the associated plans. So those are some things that I tried to say in a little bit of a rush, but I hope they bring to the fore the issues that we have to deal with when we look at a just energy transition from one that is really intensive and fossil-based and potentially finite and not as clean as we would like it to be, to something that is cleaner and greener, but looking beyond energy generation itself, to saying when we look at metals extraction, how do we also then put on the lens of sustainability and uncoupling as we do that?
Absolutely, and I think those points have been very clear in how we can definitely engage through the energy mix. Snowden, I'm going to come back to you on your theme in the concept of leaving no one behind. And what I want you to really engage on is the strategy that and the approach that we had mentioned earlier on PIDA, and how that plays a role in essentially not leaving any African behind.
Thank you very much for your. Africa is diverse, and with the PIDA program, the objective is to make sure that all members are moving at the same pace. And what happened in the development of the PIDA program was that the program was driven from the grassroots itself. We have 8 economic blocks in the continent. And these 8 economic blocks have got their members. For example, let me use the case of SADC. SADC has got about 15, if not 16 member states, which belong to them. And in developing the PIDA program, SADC had to convene its members to make sure that they submit programs which will drive their economic development. And these programs had to be filtered at the SADC level to make sure that these programs are not resource intensive, i.e. we are decoupling the use of resources and making sure that these programs are not resource intensive, but we're growing the economies of the continent by making sure that we are using sustainable means. So that's how the development of the PIDA program came. And with these all RECs coming together, then their programs were amalgamated at the continental level, and that's what constituted the PIDA program. In that way, the process has been that no member state is left behind. However, there are challenges in implementing the PIDA program in that as the continental program, we've tried as much as we can to make sure that there are those countries that are lagging behind. But when it comes up to infrastructure programs that have been developed, programmed, financing becomes a little bit of a challenge, because there are certain environmental factors, there are also certain conducive political challenges that some countries may be facing that may not attract financing to these particular programs, which are aimed at driving economic growth. So one thing that the continent must be looking at is also to look at how does the continent itself generate resources that should be in a position to finance its own programs. And that's one particular issue that I think we must look at it critically, because over-dependence on financing from external partners has made some other countries to lag behind in terms of development if they're not able to raise resources that can finance those particular programs. So I think as a continent, it's time now that we must be looking at generating our own internal resources to make sure that those countries that are lagging behind should be also assisted in terms of generating that particular growth that we're looking at. And just to conclude, I think allow me to contribute to what Dr. Chikwamba has just also alluded to when it comes up to the issue of energy. I was listening attentively, and I think I had picked up one or two issues that I wanted to contribute. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the continent as a whole, without looking at the PIDA program itself, we've got a mammoth task to make sure that there is equitable access to electricity. There's about 600 million inhabitants of the continent, and we're roughly about 1.2 or so billion inhabitants of the continent. And out of that, 600 million people do not have access to electricity. And out of that as well, we've got about 890 million of people who are still, to date, as we're talking now, 2021, they are using fossil fuels for their cooking. And that's how challenging it is when we're talking about energy. And then look at the resources that the continent has. When we talk of sunlight, the solar energy that the continent can generate from the solar that we do have in the continent, it's quite enormous. But why is it that we're not able to provide for these particular individuals that they cannot afford electricity? The issue is about how expensive the solar components are. Expensive that the initial investment cost on its own deters citizens or individuals from going the solar route.
Absolutely.
In the long term, they are using now the fossil fuels to cover for the energy deficit that is currently prevailing. So I think one thing that we must be looking at to say, how can we industrialize ourselves? How can we use technology? How can we innovate to make sure that these particular components are manufactured and made in Africa and provided at a cost that is affordable and that can be utilized to close up this particular gap? And that will be one of the ways also of decoupling the usage of these natural resources which are going extinct, because people don't have an option. If they don't have the option, then we need to have that technology to put in place. We need to innovate, we need to industrialize and make sure that we are providing for some of these things that can be done locally instead of importing them. Thank you so much for you.
Thank you, Snowden. And Prof, as we wrap up the conversation, I think we've engaged from a high level, we've engaged the multiple stakeholders who are involved in this process. But my question to you as we close is, what do you say to ordinary South Africans, to ordinary Africans, to the innovators, the aspiring entrepreneurs who want to be active participants in the call to decoupling the economy and the growth that they can contribute to that?
For you, I would almost imagine that question was scripted, because you couldn't have asked a better question. And to everyone listening to this panel, I promise you that is not a scripted question. As Rachel was speaking, what I'm reminded of some recent research which has shown consumer preferences in emerging markets. And the consumer preferences in these emerging markets show an overwhelming preference for sustainable, renewable. And Rachel spoke about labeling and packaging as just two very obvious and immediate ways in which we as ordinary citizens can make immediate impact and contribution. inside of this forum, alongside consumers, there will be producers, and those producers have the prospect to build brand new innovations and technologies. Snowden was speaking about these. Rachel was also, and we've got example after example of ways in which these efficiencies and innovations can be brought into the production side of the economy, alongside our more sensible, more sustainable decisions as consumers. And I think that the really powerful point is that very often the assumption is made that, oh well, if you're coming from an emerging market, you're going to put price ahead of everything else, and that you'll be blinded by price in your decision. And that is not what the evidence says. The evidence points to very conscious decisions amongst many consumers in new and emerging markets. And my closing observation would be to remind us of the mountain kingdom of Bhutan, who has put the measurement of gross national happiness as their primary barometer ahead of achieving growth in gross domestic product. It's growth in gross national happiness.
Absolutely. Well, I think a beautiful way to close off this discussion on how we could build better brilliantly. And to my panelists, thank you so much for this critical engagement. We definitely are looking forward to further engaging on how economic growth can be achieved through decoupling.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. That was a panel discussion themed Decoupling Economic Growth from Resource Regeneration. Now, providing a distinct lay of the land on a greener and more sustainable Africa that needs to be put in practice. Expertly engaging was Snowden Mmadi, the infrastructure expert at the African Union Development Agency at AUDA-NEPAD, Dr. Rachel Chikwamba, the Group Executive for Chemicals, Agriculture, Food and Health at the CSIR, and Professor Adrian Saval, the Professor and Director at the Center for African Management and Markets at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Now we shift gears to the perfect migration from the potential of the economic growth for one sector and into the digital economy of financial inclusion, looking at the democratization of data and devices. For this Tech Talk, we welcome Bradwin Roper, the CEO of FNB Connect.
Good afternoon, delegates. I hope you're having a wonderful conference thus far. My name is Brad Roper, and I'm the proud CEO of a business called FNB Connect. This afternoon, I want to chat to you about the digital economy, financial inclusion, as well as something that I call the democratization, that's a mouthful, of data and devices. So just a quick run through of what I'll be sharing with you this afternoon. I'll run through a model called the 6D model, mobile connectivity insights. I'll share that with you, bring that home onto our beautiful continent. We'll then talk a little bit about disintermediation between banks and telecommunications and some trends that we're seeing in that space. I want to talk to you about some mega trends then, something that's called the Internet of Behaviors. And lastly, I'd like to leave us all with some insights around, what does this mean to be a leader in today's day and age? So the 6D model is something that I think has long been around. I was first introduced to it by the Singularity University. I've had the fortune of attending a few conferences there. But very briefly, in order for something to get completely disruptive and democratized, there's a sequence of events that happens along this exponential growth curve. So the first thing is, things often become digitized. Once something becomes digitized, it immediately gets into that exponential growth curve. similar to computing. It spreads fast, much like the internet today, and many people immediately get access to and understand what the product is about. That being said, the second phase is that it's somewhat deceptive. Growth is initially a little bit slow. For that reason, its potential might become a little bit deceptive. After that growth speed increases, in a matter of time, that digital technology growth becomes notable everywhere. The best way to describe this is often it's said that, that it takes 6 years to become an overnight success. The next phase of the model is that it becomes disruptive. So here, digital technologies are not only cost-effective and efficient. Digital things or services have a tendency of outsmarting their traditional counterparts, and as a result, people will tend to go for digital technologies and forego the more traditional ones. It then very quickly becomes demonetized. So with the advancement of digital technologies, it starts removing money from the equation, and more concentration goes to the enhancement of the software. The software becomes less expensive and more ubiquitous. It becomes dematerialized, and I'll give you a good example of what dematerialization looks like in the next slide. And then once that happens, it then becomes completely democratized. So once something becomes fully digital, it can be accessed by millions of people. And that's why powerful tools really become accessible, and it's not limited to the super rich, but really becomes ubiquitous across societies. So the best example of this is the maps example. So it started off as paper. We used to, if you think about it, we used to have to drive to get big map books for different versions of different cities. It was monetized. We would have to pay for these things. Initially, when that GPS thing came out, it was very confusing, very deceptive. People didn't really understand the technology. Can I really trust it? And if you think about today's day and age, it's completely ubiquitous. It's been completely democratized. It's the anchor of companies such as Uber. It's been dematerialized, and it's all available in a host of different platforms in various forms of software, most notably, obviously, in our mobile telephones. So on that note, it's crazy to think, if you look at this slide, just 20 years ago, everything that's been packed into this little device in today's day and age. So this piece of technology is a fantastic example of just all of the different elements of that 6D model that I've shared a little bit earlier. Just crazy how exponential that technology has grown. On the note of exponential technology, so you would have heard about a concept called Moore's Law, and just how exponential technologies can help solve for common problems. This is a graph that shows, the cost per genome, and you can see that exponential, decrease in that cost over time. So leveraging this technology, did you know that it took the pharma companies just 2 days to map out the genome in order to combat the vaccine, in order to develop the vaccine and combat the virus as we're seeing today? So that's just the anchor for the discussion. And I want to get stuck into some trends around mobile connectivity and what it means in today's day and age. So I'm anchoring this discussion in a body of work by the GSMA. So the GSMA represents the interests of mobile operators worldwide, uniting more than 750 operators and nearly 400 companies in the broader mobile ecosystem, including handset and device manufacturers, software companies, equipment providers, internet companies, as well as organizations in the adjacent sectors. So they measure mobile connectivity across 4 enablers. There's 4 enablers, there's 14 dimensions, there's 41 different indicators. So it's quite a robust measure and tool for measuring mobile connectivity, and it's quite understood globally. So the 4 enablers that they deem critical for mobile connectivity are as follows. The first one is infrastructure. So this is the availability of high-performance internet and coverage. The second one, and this one becomes very important for us on this continent, is affordability. So this is about the availability of mobile services and devices at price points that reflect the level of income across the national population. So things like Gini coefficients, as well as income distribution, national income distribution become really important around affordability. The next important one is just consumer readiness. So are citizens aware, and do citizens have the skills that are needed in order to value and make use of internet services? The fourth one is then content and services. So this is about the availability of secure online content and services accessible and, most importantly, relevant to the local population. So some of these 14 dimensions include things like network coverage under network infrastructure, mobile pricings and tariffs under affordability, digital skills, gender equality under the consumer readiness, and local relevance and security under content and services. So that being said, so this is the model. I'll share with you some insights. So this is a view of the world and the ranking of how connected the world was in 2014, 2015. And what you'll see is, you know, where our continent has lagged behind. So you'll see the Americas, Asia's really making some very big leaps and bounds in terms of connectivity. And you can see not much progress made on our beautiful continent. That being said, smartphones have become more affordable, but handset affordability remains the main barrier to mobile ownership on the continent. The average cost of an entry-level internet-enabled device in lower and middle-income countries, which is where we find ourselves in this continent, fell from 44% of monthly income in 2018 to 34% in 2019. So good progress being made there, driven primarily by an increase in availability of lower-cost devices in sub-Saharan Africa as well as Southern Asia. And I'll give some examples on our continent of, you know, where we've been leading the charge there. Mobile data is becoming increasingly affordable, but is still a significant challenge for the poorest in our society in 2019. The cost of 1 gig of data as a share of monthly GDP per capita had decreased by more than 40% in lower and middle income countries since 2016. However, more than half of our lower middle income countries still fall short of what this commission's target is, which is to make entry-level broadband services less than 2% of monthly income per capita. So that becomes an important figure. Less than 2% of monthly income per capita is the threshold that they've set out. Since 2015, 1 billion people have gained access to the internet, as well as internet services through mobile phones, many for the first time. But by the end of 2019, almost half of the world's population was using mobile internet. Despite this growth, 51% of the population is still not using mobile internet, either because of a lack of mobile broadband coverage or key barriers such as a lack of awareness, affordability, or a lack of literacy around digital skills. Bridging the persistent digital divide and providing mobile internet access to the 4 billion people still not connected is more important than ever in the current context. Meanwhile, it's becoming increasingly challenging as the unconnected tend to be poorer. Those who are not connected, however, can be split into two groups, the uncovered and the covered but still not connected. The uncovered are those who do live in an area that is covered by mobile broadband network services. We refer to this as the coverage gap. The covered but not connected are those who live within the footprint of a mobile broadband network but are not using mobile internet services. We refer to this as the usage gap. Our beautiful continent, sadly, has the biggest coverage gap, which represents an opportunity for infrastructure development and for policymakers and for large institutions to help solve for that. I believe, however, that our biggest opportunity lies in that usage gap, sitting at 49%. This is where we have coverage, but people are not connected. So how can we go about making better usage or better utilization of this opportunity? What you're seeing on this graph is just the change in smartphone adoption by region from 2014 to 2019. So you have seen Asia and our continent making significant inroads in terms of growth. This is one of the factors driving high levels of smartphone adoption amongst adults in the two regions. In South Asia, it increased from 36% in 2017 to 47% in 2019. While in sub-Saharan Africa, it increased from 26% to 38% over the same period. So smartphone ownership is a particularly important factor in driving internet mobile usage. In addition, what you're seeing here is the affordability of an entry-level internet-enabled phone in these lower middle and income countries by region from 2016 to 2019. So in addition to reducing the cost of handsets, other solutions to increase affordable access to devices need to be considered. During the past few years, many consumers on the continent cannot afford to purchase a phone in a single upfront payment. So countries are leapfrogging and benefiting by launching, for example, financing models such as installment plans, subsidy loans, leases, and rentals. Operators are also innovating with alternative credit scoring models, so that leaves us all with an opportunity. Nigeria is a shining beacon of an example of a country that has done phenomenally well in terms of getting its citizens connected. Nigeria now has one of the most affordable handset costs in the world. In 2017, the cheapest internet-enabled phone cost 42% of monthly GDP per capita, but this fell to just 12% in 2019, as MTN, the biggest mobile network operator on the continent, launched its MTN 3G smart feature phone for just $20. So what this graph shows, once again, is how on the continent we're an outlier. So the graph shows the affordability of 1 gig of data by region from 2016 to 2019. And you can see why we've made significant inroads in terms of reducing the cost of data on the continent, how we are still a significant outlier. Again, Nigeria shows how a country can create a virtuous cycle of achieving more coverage and at the same time offering more affordable devices and mobile plans that in turn enable operators to roll out more coverage as usage increases. Mobile tariffs have become more affordable, with 1 gig of data decreasing from 3.3% to 1.5% of GDP per capita between 2016 and 2019. This is below the international affordability threshold of 2%. This has helped drive smartphone adoption among adults in the country. This has also been shown to have a wider economic and social implications in the country. A recent study by the GSMA and the World Bank found that the rollout of mobile broadband networks in Nigeria between 2010 and 2016 increased labor force participation, especially among women, and reduced extreme poverty by about 7 percentage points. So that just shows the virtual benefit of getting more people connected. So that being said, we now know what some of the barriers are. I now just want to pivot into this disintermediation topic. Banks becoming telcos and telcos becoming banks. So what does it mean if we can get ordinary citizens connected through both data and devices? I want to pivot towards, I guess, our biggest company on the continent in this regard. We need look no further than MTN as a shining beacon of a global example of where this disintermediation is really coming to life. So do yourself a favor and check out the MTN Momo app, which is, I think is a global phenomenon. So you can see this is a screen grab of me just playing around on the app. What you can do with 100 Rand stored in that inside that store of wallet. There's a loan that becomes available. There's an online retail experience, so you can see a virtual retail experience. So I think it's a fantastic example of one company that is now being not just a bank but a telecommunications provider, but also an online retailer. So some fantastic innovation. And it is no surprising that you can see the balances of Momos across various countries growing at an exponential rate. Another exciting partnership to look out for, I guess, is the Vodacom and Alipay partnership. So I'd be very excited to see how both Vodacom and Alipay, how they bring this to market and what levels of disruption they may bring to the market as well. So also a very exciting trend to look out for. Obviously, it would be remiss of me not to talk about how I think that we as FirstRand have responded. So first and foremost, we spoke about the cost of a gig of data. In South Africa, on average, the cost of 1 gig of data was priced at about 100 Rand. We, as just for being an FNB main bank customer, priced that at 59 Rand, so a 40% savings. Also, if you look on the right-hand side of the graph, you can see what we're doing around devices. So this value proposition talks to a smartphone at a price point of less than 100 Rand a month, all launched on the FNB banking app, and lots more innovation around just, both data prices and device prices. I guess another interesting part of the business that I'm incredibly proud of is the service provider business. This is an online retail business that does in excess of 18 billion rand in turnover. So if you think about, the mega trends that we've seen around online retail, this is a very mature business. We've also launched into some very exciting categories such as transport, education, and soon to be launching into productivity vouchers. So just a real exciting example of, how we've also tried to contribute in our own way as First Rand to this topic. So I want to move on to some very exciting topic, which is some future megatrends that I want to share with you as delegates. So the first one is this thing called the Internet of Behaviors. Did you know that the number of Internet of Things and devices has doubled over the past 5 years? These things are everywhere with us today, from wearable technologies that track our fitness 24/7 to remote access to electrical devices in your home. The shift to mobile devices has changed the way we interact with the world around us. The collection and usage of data by these Internet of Things devices provides valuable information around users' behaviors, internets, and preference. Thus, the concept of the Internet of Behaviors was born. The Internet of Behaviors concept seeks to address how to understand data properly and apply that understanding to create and promote new products from a human psychological perspective. The Internet of Behavior collects digital dust from people's lives in a variety of sources. Public places and public organizations can use this information to influence behavior. That's the definition by Gartner. Obviously, the Internet of Behavior presents significant and pervasive social and ethical implications that we need to be cognizant of. Collecting data to influence behaviors has the potential to be a very powerful tool, and its social reception might depend on just how heavy-handed organizations are with what they do and leverage that data for. So an example of a total experience in action is a large telecommunications company transformed its entire experience to improve safety and satisfaction. First, it deployed an appointment system via an existing app. When customers arrived for their appointment and came within 75 feet of the store, they received two things. One, a notification to guide them through the check-in process using location-based technology, and two, an alert letting them know exactly how long it would be before they could safely enter the store and maintain a social distance. In order to enhance employee safety, the same technology, the company also deployed the technology that allowed associates to co-browse and co-experience that customer hardware without physically touching the device. So that's just one example of how the Internet of Behaviors can completely radicalize and change the way that we interact and the way that we consumerize certain things, both services and products. Another very interesting megatrend that I want to share with you as delegates is, this moving beyond devices. So the metaverse is a collection of a virtual, connected, shared experience. It's the sum of all the virtual worlds, possibly augmented reality, and the Internet of Things. The concept of a future iteration of the Internet, which is made up of persistent, shared, and 3D virtual experiences, which is perceived in this metaverse. So up on the screen are just 3 live examples of where this is becoming reality. And the interesting thing here, so here's a big mega trend, is, the virtual goods market is set to grow to a 200 billion rand industry by 2025. So people spend money where they spend their time, and increasingly we're spending more and more time in these metaverses. Lastly, I just want to share with you my thoughts on what does it mean to be a leader in today's day and age. So there is a report titled Delve Deeper into Changing Organizational Culture and Mindset by Deloitte in India. What the report shares is, the crisis has created an unprecedented circumstances for today's leaders. Leaders are required to set direction amidst uncertainty, be role models of resilience. Our roles in keeping the teams engaged and motivated, it's never been as important as it is right now. So the focus for leaders and its employees is to prepare for this new normal. We've seen the effects of what working from home has done for people's mental well-being. We can see unprecedented, stats in terms of, all of the negative effects of what this global pandemic has had. So a culture and leadership mindset that helps set direction and disambiguates a lot of the uncertainty, I think, is going to be imperative for leaders in today's day and age. The last thing I want to leave you with is, technology. We've seen this massive move from hardware to software, and I want to leave you with this concept of humanware. Technology is both interesting and fascinating, but it is humans who make technology come alive. Technology is moving at an accelerating pace. We've first moved from all hardware to all software era, and we're now moving into an era that I call humanware. Technology today is about making our lives as human beings better. So the future we create depends on the challenges we dare to take on today. I challenge you to use your technology to both harness purpose as well as profit for the future. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. It's been an absolute privilege and pleasure sharing this time with you all.
I absolutely love the point of harnessing technology for purpose, as well as the humanware element of it, because it is, of course, humans who make technology come to life and create this impact that we are engaging on. A huge thank you to Bradwin Roper, the CEO of FNB Connect, for the stellar tech talk on understanding the digital economy relative to financial innovation and implementing the democratization of data and devices. We're loving your comments, questions, and engagements that are coming through on the platform and on social media, with the official hashtag of the Africa Tech Week Summit being hashtag Africa Tech Week. We now progress to our second panel discussion today, Unlocking Africa's Economic Potential Through Digital Transformation. Exponential technologies and business practices are rapidly altering the business landscape, and we have been clear from the onset that no one gets left behind. Investing in technologies for company growth has a knock-on effect on the triple bottom line, and in this conversation, we're tasked with the theme of this discussion, and that is unlocking Africa's economic potential through digital transformation. To offer context in how we'll be unloading this theme, a few things we'll be taking into consideration is the imprint of the pandemic in recognizing the potential of Africa's economy through digital transformation. We also shift gears by observing how one of South Africa's leading ICT companies, Gijima, is winning and engaging in Africa's capacity to prosper by taking a hold of the digital revolution through its digital solutions. And we ask the question of what exactly it takes to unlock a digital Africa. And before we get into this conversation of vigor, here's a message from our sponsor. To ensure that we land the mark on this discussion, we're joined by an expert panel, and leading this is Shabna Harilal, the Managing Director of Gijima Technology Solutions. With over 20 years of experience in the ICT sector, Shabna leads the Gijima Technology Solutions business. Shabna, a great pleasure to have you joining us today. Also joining is Tim Mitchell, the Head of Digital Transformation at Flux Labs. Tim, we very much look forward to your contributions this afternoon. And to round off our panel is Lindiwe Matlali, the founder and CEO of Africa Tech Geeks. Lindiwe, thank you so much for joining us today. And to kickstart us off in inviting your opening remarks, The pandemic has really put a spanner in the works for some reports on trends, as well as predicting some of the technologies that we could harness for economic growth. And as thought leaders and practitioners in this digital future and intelligent future for Africa that we want to see, what have been some of the challenges that has come through for technologies that are accelerating or even sometimes impeding as a result of the pandemic? Tim, I'll start this with you.
Thank you, Vuyo, and thank you to the Gajima team and Africa Tech Week for having me. It's great to be here today. I think for me, during the pandemic, my greatest learning was the expectation gap in virtual working. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, we had this futuristic vision of what remote and hybrid working should look like. You can think of something like Microsoft Mesh, this amazing platform that allows us to create augmented reality holograms to interact with our colleagues in real time. But on the other hand, we have the stark reality of what virtual work really looks like. And I'm not just talking about the viral incident that happened a couple of months ago with the US attorney who struggled to deactivate his cat filter on Zoom and had to convince the courtroom judge that he was in fact a human. What I'm talking about is that in Africa, we have real challenges in connectivity, infrastructure, and an inherent digital skills deficit, which is hindering our ability to thrive in the digital economy. So my hope is that Africa can bridge this expectation gap by investing into the digital fluency and tools that allows us to accelerate the digital economy across the continent.
Absolutely. Lindiwe, I'm going to come to you on the challenges, especially in working with young people and working with young women in rural communities and peri-urban communities as well, in the challenges that you've faced, particularly because the programs that Africa Tech Week does run are face-to-face.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vuyo. Thanks to Africa Tech Week and Gajima as well. I think, I will just reiterate what Tim has said. The challenges that were brought by the lack of connectivity, and a lot of the children that we work with, are kids from disadvantaged communities. South Africa, even, I think before COVID, everybody thought that the fourth industrial revolution is coming. We're preparing for the fourth industrial revolution. And then COVID happened, and we are in the fourth industrial revolution. And it showed how not prepared and not ready we were. From the lack of infrastructure, even for me, working with teachers also, very few of our teachers were able to pivot and be able to teach online. And also for those who were able to, the learners themselves were not able to come and log on because they didn't have the proper devices for learning. We talk about how South Africa has 98% penetration of cell phone, but what kind of cell phones? So we've seen even with us when we were working with the kids, when we ran our online school, we were, it was really great to see that we had over 600,000 children that we've reached. But if you look at the number, if I just say 600,000, it looks, oh my God, that was huge. But if you look at how many kids we have, we've got over 12 million children that are currently at school. So it was just a drop in the ocean. And a lot of those kids, especially those in disadvantaged communities, were not able to attend our classes. So for them, going back to school face-to-face was the only way. So it's really important that I hope that after this, the importance of connectivity, the importance of reducing the cost of the internet, and making sure that, I think right now what COVID has shown, that every family should have a device, a proper device, a laptop at home. Because, for Africa, not just because I think sometimes as South Africans we live in this bubble, but if you think of in East Africa and West Africa, for example, we had Ebola. So it's not the first time that children stay at home and not being able to go to school. Now we are talking about it because it affects the whole world. But in Africa, it's something that happens all the time. So I think the way we look at the fourth industrial revolution and look at especially the importance of connectivity, internet connection is no longer a nice to have, is a must have.
Absolutely. And I think, Shabna, this ties in really well as we welcome your opening remarks to not only the expectation gap, but to Lindiwe's point that the fourth industrial revolution is no longer an event that we're still waiting to RSVP to. It is here. And how Gijima is essentially looking at this kind of strategy to respond to the pandemic.
Sure, thank you, Lindiwe. You know, I shared the sentiments of a lot of the colleagues on the call where the pandemic has really catapulted the transition that is very much needed to participate in a digital economy. It's really forced a lot of us across the stakeholder spectrum in the country, from government to private sector to ICT to you know, the traditional household, to relook and repurpose themselves and how they navigate these streams. And as an organization, you know, we too found ourselves in the midst of the pandemic where your strategy of digitization was rapidly enhanced. Fortunately, being a technology house and being one of the leading ICT companies in the country, you know, if we look at the pillars for digitization, we were largely prepared around them. You know, if we look at the building blocks that are very much needed to build a digital economy, you know, looking at a digital government as a good starting point, you know, as an organization, we have already built the first public-private cloud for the South African government. And it's a strategy that allows you to access services readily, whilst we were in the midst of the pandemic and whilst we looked at, you know, just the communication strategies nationally and across the continent. You know, we were largely not geared in the African continent to control information, to understand what we are allowing to filter through to our citizens. And by being able to have the first public-private cloud up, we were able to gear a lot of these services very rapidly. You know, being able to aggregate and integrate into a multi-cloud strategy like AWS and Azure has enabled us to bring on board a lot of our partners and access to international services that we were able to make very readily available. You know, if you look at the remote workforce, that was, you know, overnight you had to transgress and transform your organizations and to ensure that South Africa didn't have a Kodak moment where you were not geared and you were unable to transition and transform. We were able to very quickly, in our strong partnerships with the likes of Microsoft, transgress, you know, to switch on the activities of Teams, bring Zoom into play and transform workforces. And you know, very underrated skill is change management. Without the right change management, you're never able to build these ecosystems. And as Gijima, we were able to do that for a lot of our customers and their customers. You know, if we look at other building blocks, you know, if we go to let's take the healthcare vertical, very topical during this pandemic. As an organization, we're able to address both public and private sector, and being able to look at accessibility to information, accessibility to care, and the right point in care, completely transforming the way care is delivered. You know, as we all went into mass panic and everyone avoided trying to get into any facility to get care, we were able to, as an organization, assist with remote care, with remote dispensing of medication, so we could take point of care to the people in the country. And these are some of the technology stacks that we have. You know, as an organization, we look at innovation. And, you know, I think, Tim, this is going to be very, very relevant to what you and your organization do. It's the harnessing of entrepreneurship, changing the mindsets, right? Shifting ourselves from being just a technology company to a purpose-led company, and being able to intrinsically knit ourselves into the purpose of our customers. So we don't do tech for tech's sake, but we really build purpose purpose-driven applications. And this is where we latch onto entrepreneurship. And for me, this is one of the cornerstones of digital transformation, and being able to create participation into the digital economy across Africa, and not limited to Africa. We have to stretch this to the globe, and being able to create those platform businesses that modernize supply chains, that really transform organizations, and having inclusive participation. And I think, Lindiwe, this is something that's very dear to your heart, is addressing the missing middle, not having these services only available to the 15% of the population, but really enabling the 85% of the population to participate. And we have to get into the minds and change the way we participate. So Lindiwe, I think, like I said, very key to the role that you play, and you touch such a core part of South Africa in terms of being able to be a shapeshifter and being able to change the mindsets. And this is really what we do as a business. We operate across all the ecosystems. If we look at, you rightly touch on having the right accessibility to infrastructure. And how do we transform, as the world is gearing towards 5G, how do we transform Africa to not only be a reactive, but to be a proactive, bringing all the predictive topics of artificial intelligence and robotics to create efficiency? We really have to hit the reset button to transform ourselves. And I think it was a nice discussion we were having a bit earlier on why can Africa not be the offshore arm for the world? Why are we not participating at the level of an India, where India, is known to be delivering high quality services at low costs of production? If we look at the African continent, we have such a vast array of skills that sit in the continent. Why are we not mobilizing ourselves to be that next offshore arm for all the major players? You look at the unemployment rate in our country, we rightly positioned to be able to transform. And, if I look inside our business, we have a human capital arm that builds ICT capability. And, we pair that with the likes of what a Lindiwe and many organizations like yourself do, Lindiwe, then we've got a recipe and a framework to transform the continent. And with the right platform enablement, we make these services available. If you look at topics like smart cities, how do we transform? How do we gear ourselves for the driverless cars, and enabling you to do more, making it all about the human? And I listened to Bradwin Roper from the earlier conversations, putting the human at the center of this and allowing you to maximize your participation in the economy. As we roll out 5G, and it's not an anomaly, it's here, it's being done, but do it so that we have inclusion and collective inclusion across the continent. So for you, that would be some of my comments in terms of what we do as Gajima, how we're tackling this, and how we have found ourselves in the midst of hitting the reset button in some of our businesses as well. But it's your agility and your ability to thrive in this chaos world. It's how do you look at this? And in the chaos lies a lot of opportunity, and we've seen that come to light for us because we've decided to focus on where we can go and not the barriers to entry. So for you, I think those are some of, thank you.
Yeah, I think you've really captured excellently, some of the work that has been done to showcase to what Bradwin talks about, the human way, and putting humans and putting purpose at the center of technology. And of course, the impact of the efficiencies, as well as the work that is being done around the workforce and the ecosystem. And I'm going to cross over to Tim on a point that Shavna briefly touched on, and that is on purpose-led change management and the kinds of roles that are emerging from this pandemic. In the recent years, we've had quite the spotlight on CTOs and chief information officers looking at the scrutiny of privacy from global firms. When we're looking at even to your role, heading up digital transformation, what does that look like in a day-to-day, and what are the expectations coming out of this in the importance of this conversation?
Thank you, Vuyo. And thank you, Shubna. I think you touched onto a great point earlier, and it's something around the fact that the world is changing at a rate of change that we've never seen before. There are disruptions that we never could have expected. And unfortunately, in Africa, the odds are not stacked in our favor. When we talk about connectivity, infrastructure, digital skills. And it's for that reason, I think, Vuyo, to answer your question, I've got a short answer and a long answer, and I'll try and get through both of them. The short answer is that yes, I think that the digital leader is critically important to Africa, and more so now than ever. The long answer, I guess, starts with a bit of a story around, I'm sure we've all heard the joke by now, who led the digital transformation of your organization? Was it the CIO? Was it the CTO? Was it the chief digital officer? And the answer to that, of course, is no, it was COVID-19. And while I appreciate that the pandemic has done a lot to accelerate digital transformation, I personally believe that we will need strong digital leadership to drive it forward in a sustainable manner. So to me, that aligns to the fact that there's going to be a rise in prevalence and importance of digital leadership roles. And this is something that I'm observing in my current role. I work with a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs where digital skills and digital leadership is paramount. And in my previous role, I used to work at Deloitte, and I was leading the digital and innovation portfolio across Africa for many of our clients. And I would observe that many of the blue chip corporates starting to see the rise of the chief digital officer and digital leaders who would have to wear a number of different hats to drive their organization forward in this modern digital African economy that we face. I recently did a Google Trends search on the search terms digital transformation and chief digital officer. And you'll be surprised to hear that in the past 5 years, the search volume for those two specific terms have increased by 300 and 400%, which just goes to show at a global level, the mandate and the importance behind digital transformation has never been bigger. And that's just one of many small data points that speaks to this digital leadership imperative. So I think to get into a bit of the crux of, what does it take to be a digital leader? And what are the important factors that help to drive a digital leader forward? I think that you touched on earlier, there are a number of factors to take into account. Regulations is a driving factor. Perhaps the risk of business model disruption, revenue and margin pressures, customer experience expectations, which have never been bigger, and new opportunities to create value through exponential technologies. But for me, the mark of a good digital leader comes down to 4 key digital traits. The first one for me would be the mark of exponential leadership. So that's the ability to be a visionary, a digitally fit leader who can define the ideal future state for your business, and then work backwards to define the digital transformation roadmap and multiply your impact through attracting, retaining, and training the best digital skills to execute on your digital transformation roadmap. You could think of a company like Netflix and how they've created this unbeatable digital culture. They lead by context instead of control. Their ability to retain and develop some of the world's best designers, developers, creatives, and technologists in the world. The second factor to me would be around the creation of an innovation culture. So this is not an oxymoron, but a digital leader needs to be able to create a well-governed space for experimentation. They need to bring together the right mix of people who have a succeed fast approach to innovation. And they focus on the actual end user outcomes, the desired needs that need to be built into a product or a solution. And a great example here is Google X's Moonshot program, where their employees have this enviable sandbox to play and to experiment and to develop some of the next generation products in AI, augmented reality, autonomous vehicles, renewable energy, even stratospheric Wi-Fi balloons, which is a new project that Google has been working on. The third factor over here, when it comes to digital leadership, is to have a balanced digital portfolio. I often say to my clients and my colleagues that you need to be able to eat while you dream. And today's MVPs and proofs of value need to fund tomorrow's business transformation. So you need to understand how to prioritize your initiatives and manage that digital portfolio across business horizons. In this case, you could think of a company like Tesla, an ex-South African Elon Musk, building a great digital portfolio in autonomous vehicles, moving from the expensive luxury Roadster to the more affordable Model 3. But what's more important to me is how he's complemented all of these products with a balanced portfolio of renewable energy and battery storage products for the home. Perhaps sometimes going a little bit too far when it comes to adding crazy ideas like his own tequila brand to the portfolio, but clearly an experimental figure who brings together a balanced digital portfolio. And then I think the last point that I'd like to make here, the last factor of a true digital leader is in creating cross-functional collaboration. So this is all about breaking down traditional silos in a business, improving the collaboration inside and outside the business. Shubna was referring to entrepreneurship earlier, which I couldn't agree with more. And then looking beyond the paradigms of current business units and functions to bring together skills in a new way. And I think my favorite example in this point is ING Bank and their creation of a new digital bank that was born purely through an agile transformation. They were able to create these self-organizing, multidisciplinary and mission-led tribes of professionals who actually came together organically. So they knew what the end goal was, but it was up to them which projects and which specific teammates they wanted to work with. And they would come together organically to solve these challenges, then disband and move away to solve the next grand challenge, all in the best interests of building one of the world's best digital banks. So I think just to recap to your question, Vuyo, is yes, absolutely. The digital transformation leader is here to stay, but it's critically important that their role focuses on the right digital leadership traits.
Absolutely. So I think from the past few minutes, we've learned that not only is the 4IR here to stay, but digital leaders are here to stay. And I think looking at through these 4 components that mark a digital leader is something that's going to be quite important. Looking at exponential leadership, the innovation culture that needs to be created, a balanced digital portfolio, balancing the crazy with the not so crazy, with the entrepreneurial mindset, and of course creating that shared value with cross-functional collaboration. In order to create these digital leaders, Lindiwe, you sit at the heart of this when it comes to creating them from the ground up. In an earlier discussion, we were looking at the call of leaving no one behind, and I think to the work that you're doing across the continent, you're calling on young South Africans, young Africans to take the lead in this. And how have you ensured that even throughout the mark of the pandemic, these programs and how you're designing these programs, this is something that's definitely coming out? Linda, I believe your mic is muted, and that is how, again, is the mark of a virtual conversation. We can hear you.
Yeah, I was all along thinking you guys, but I think if we talk about, for us, I think a lot of the work has actually been completely hindered because as much as I mentioned earlier, many young people, but a lot of kids that needed our service were unable. And what the pandemic has shown is how really deep the inequality is. And designing programs, I think somebody was even saying to me earlier, why don't you create your coding program and make them offline? I am actually against creating programs, that are specific offline. We do a program that you can start as a starting stage, but for the children, for them to be able to connect and be able to do what we want them to do, they have to be online. So it's something that we can't wish away, and it has to be addressed. So if even if we look at the children that are still unable to go to school, we, as Tim was talking about, the Telsas, the Netflix, and all those business have been built because they were able to grow and reach the world specifically because of the internet. So internet connectivity is important, and we are working with the Department of Basic Education, where we assisted them in creating the coding and robotics, and now we are working with them in implementing it. But and I keep, every time when we're in meetings, I always keep emphasizing, we cannot wish away the fact that all our schools have to be connected, because how are these kids going to get the information they need? Some of the children, they may come from rural areas where they don't have any role models. Even myself, I come from a very disadvantaged communities where I grew up. It was a very tiny town, one road. We only had PEP and Ackermans and SPAR. I remember my first time coming to UCT, it was, in Cape Town. I saw a robot for the first time, and, I ate a spare for the first time. The culture shock the first year was really, really difficult. And I think it is not okay to actually glorify that, to say, it was great, your rags to riches story. So it actually infuriates me a lot, because I feel like, the children, when they're at school, they don't have to be rich, and I think education, is the only way in which they can break away the cycle of poverty. And we always talk about the quote by Nelson Mandela. We love it, but I think there isn't enough being done to make sure that every child get an opportunity they deserve. The research a few years ago, I think it was in 2017, that came from MIT, where they were talking about the lost Einsteins. And basically the findings is basically looking at the children who could have come up with the best innovations that could have changed the world, but were not able to, not because they were not brilliant, not because they were not innovative, because they just did not have the opportunity. So closing the opportunity gap is important. And I think part of that, a big part of that for Africans, is really making sure that they are connected. I always, people ask me, how did you meet Dr. Marianne Croak? I mean, we're talking about her as, she's my mentor. She's a person I talk to almost daily now, texting. But the only reason that Marianne and I met, and when I tell you that we haven't even had a chance to meet face to face, because every time I was in the US, she wouldn't be in Silicon Valley. If I'm there, she's not there. So we've always spoke basically only via Zoom, and online. And even the way we met, it was because I met her and I sent a message, right? Because it's somebody I've been looking up to for a long time. So for a lot of these children, they will not have a role model that they can see every day and say, this is the person. So some of these people that they will see, even you and I, we are role models for a lot of Black girls that look up to us, but they may not be able to reach us. And the only way they do is if they can send a message on Facebook, send a message on Twitter, and if they manage to get our number on WhatsApp. But if they do not have the connectivity, how do we expect that their lives are going to change? How are they going to find, if they don't have a tutor, for example? I mean, now with my children, when they do the work, because I've been, they've been doing a lot of online learning. Every time, they don't even come to me to ask for any support. The first thing they do, and they Google. So by the time they come to me, they will say, I Googled it and I tried to watch YouTube, I still don't get it. And those are the skills we want to teach kids to be able to find information, to learn how to support themselves. And if they don't have those tutors or people they can ask, the internet is the best place where they can find the support that they need. So I don't want to actually even glorify the fact that we need to take a lot of what we are doing offline, because it is not effective. It's not going to close the digital divide, because we're going to keep on justifying it by saying, as long as we can try to teach them how to code offline, at some point they have to get a computer to be able to learn Python or C, So we have to make sure that we deal with those. And the role of the private sector, Subna, is so important, because we know that government doesn't have the money for them to be able to do this. How can we make sure that we can work together? Because if these kids, a lot of these kids that are brilliant, that you're not gonna able to even get there to work for you, is because they don't have the opportunity. And if we can start working, for me, early exposure is very, very, very important. Mark Zuckerberg didn't start coding while he was at university. He started at 13. Steve Jobs started, playing around also code, if you can look at his biography as well. So early exposure matter. Seeing a role model and somebody you can look up to and aspire matter. A lot of our children in townships, they want to become soccer players or want to be the next Bonang or a DJ. That is not because, it's the only reason they do that is because those are the people they see. The only success they see is that, and visibility then matters. And so we need to make sure that we can close that as well and make sure that these kids get the opportunity that they deserve.
Absolutely. And I think quite an emphatic point that you made. And I want to remain with you, Lindiwe, for a little while longer as you speak to capturing the Einsteins and capturing the Marianne Croaks and exposing these young people to the lay of the land when we are engaging in technology. If you can speak to perhaps one or two of the programs that Africa Teen Geeks is engaging in to ensure that we do have these skills that Tim was mentioning that is needed in a digital leader.
Yeah. I mean, we have our Need to Code, which is the offline project where we do teach girls Python through knitting, introduce them to Python through knitting. And that for us, as I said, it's not because we're trying to get the kids to learn the skills offline. For us, it was a way in which we can involve the grandmothers and the mothers that do not have the technology skills, but that know how to knit. So showing that how an Asian skill can be used to teach the 21st century skills. And for girls who may not have role models, who may not know of Marion Croak, who may not know of Shupna, their grandmothers can be the ones that actually inspire them to pursue technology. So that is why we started Need to Code. And then we also have our Girl Geek program. Our Girl Geek program is really about providing role models for young girls so that we can close the gender gap in STEM. And we have one big summit every year where we invite top leaders from all over the world. I mean, the last summit we had was in 2019. We had Minette Norman, who at that time was a VP of engineering at Autodesk. We had Monique Ares, who is still the head of innovation at Facebook. We had a lot of local tech entrepreneurs, including Claire Wood, the CEO of Inosis. And last year we were actually going to have Dr. Marianne Croak, and then COVID happened, but we're still hoping to bring her. And that for us is about bringing these people that are creating and using the technology that these kids are using every day and show them that they were created by people, and especially for girls, they were created by girls, and to also make sure that they understand that technology is not a man's world. Actually, the first code was written by a woman, Ada Lovelace. So that is why it's important for us to show them that and get them to see, so that we can start creating a pipeline of young women and basically also women that will be in STEM. And then our third program, which is, I think for now, is our biggest priority, is working with the Department of Basic Education and then in introducing coding and robotics, because a lot of our programs, we were running Saturday classes at UNISA nationally, and a lot of the children that we wanted, children from disadvantaged communities, were unable to come because all UNISA campuses are in town, and something as simple as a transport was the biggest barrier for these kids to come. And then our final project that we do, and that unfortunately now has stopped because of COVID, we run a global hackathon that we've been doing in the US for the past 3 years. So the first one, we did it in Silicon Valley, and we were hosted by Symantec. And, our South African team won. They were competing against the US, Indonesia, Bolivia. And it was really amazing for me to see that, because all these kids from the township, they went. I mean, I think when they announced South African team as a winner, one of the kids said, "We beat America in America." So I was like, okay, that's not very diplomatic, but they won. I think for me, it shows in terms of that we don't have a talent deficit in the country. Even as Africans, we don't have a talent deficit. What we have is an opportunity deficit. And I think that is really important, and exposure makes such a difference. You know, they don't have just seeing somebody that looks like them, that is, you know, succeeded in the industry, and it also gives them options to understand, because not everybody is going to be Bonang, not everybody is going to be Benny McCarthy, but a lot of us can actually have a very successful career in STEM.
Absolutely. I think quite a potent point on exposing local to global, so that essentially, you know, we can take whatever innovations that we take innovation from a local perspective and take them globally. But sometimes what happens is that we acquire what happens globally, so that it can be expanded and our impact can be expanded, as well as our capabilities. And I think, Shabna, this is the segue to the recent acquisition by Gijima of T-Systems South Africa. And looking at this strategic investment, I think just lay the journey of the decision of this investment, as well as the response strategy that Gijima has had in its next phase of business, in not only expanding across Africa, but I think across the globe as well.
Thank you, Vuyo. So I think, you know, the T-Systems acquisition, acquiring T-Systems South Africa, was quite a strategic play from us as Gijima. And one of the core drivers, we saw this as a very complementary business to what we were doing inside Gijima. And, you know, in any acquisition, there's many reasons why you do it. But for us, it was really about the 1 + 1 giving us 11 and not 2. And, you know, sitting at the core, we definitely were very keen on the capability that came along with T-Systems. And, you know, if we look at the house of innovation and all the pillars amidst, you know, the strong digital leadership and the strong build on skills, you know, a very key and pertinent pillar in this ecosystem is security. And to allow the African continent to thrive and expose and break down these barriers into international markets, you know, we have in our midst one of the most core and fundamental blocks of a digital economy, and that's a very highly skilled security team that delivers world-class services and enables us to create the right type of platform businesses that we want to create to expose this to both local and international markets. You know, in addition to that, you know, owning one of our own data centers has been paramount to one of the reasons why we did the acquisition, and that gives us the reach that we want in terms of being able to create affordable platform services into the economy. You know, further to this, we now participate in rendering services to a few multinational organizations from the African continent, and largely driving one of our fundamental building blocks of positioning Africa as a key outsourcer to multinationals. And the acquisition has given us that reach. And I think for me, the most intrinsic reason for the acquisition is if we look at the digital business and being able to take what we very adequately deliver in private sector and being able to deliver that in public sector. And if we use healthcare, you know, as that vertical, just by way of example, you know, as Gijima, we are very strong in delivering healthcare services into public sector. And this is across the ecosystem of healthcare, you know, looking at patient care, looking at the full life cycle, and really transgressing hospital services from inside the walls and the boundaries of a hospital to outside. And with the acquisition of T-Systems, you know, we now deliver services to 90, if not 95% of private sector in South Africa. And for me, the standout is that we're taking a very similar solution to both private and public sector in so doing. And it's the acquisition of core IP in these spaces to be able to do such not only in healthcare, and it was a very topical point from Tim to say we need to break down the Chinese walls. We need to have the cross-vertical participation, because in so doing, we're going to really break down and create the burstability on the digital economy. I mean, imagine for a moment having one record as a South African, and we look at all the very topical things of, harvesting your voice and would you allow it or wouldn't you, and being able to look at the artificial intelligence that's overlaid on this, but having a record that spans across the automotive. We look at the narrative in retail has completely flipped on its head. How do we create the equivalent competitors to Amazon and the likes from South Africa? The sky's the limit. And in Gajima, we have a very, very, very fundamental value system that we drive, and that's none of us is as good as all of us. And by all of us coming together with the different building blocks in South Africa, we can change retail on its head. Why not be creating Africa as that hub of international and commercial trade? So these are some of the assets that we have gotten with the acquisition of T-Systems. And again, going back to this house of a digital economy. Can we create a digital government? The presence and use of digital services and platforms to enable public service delivery. We're dealing with very rudimentary problems in our country, like our infrastructure, and not only from a technology perspective, but you just look at our road infrastructure is not at its optimum. Just being able to modernize and digitize the supply chain and create more cohesiveness in those spaces will really transform a lot of the transportation and logistics verticals, which is imperative to being able to thrive in a digital economy. We then further look at the digital business, right? The development of a robust marketplace for digital trade, digital financial services, and digital content. We look at the Netflix of this world, and the sky's the limit for Netflix, and they're still in the early days, and there's a funny meme going around about investing in Netflix and securing your future. But we need to create and open up these caveats for the film industry to be able to participate and create our own version of Netflix for the African continent. We look at infrastructure, the reach of having your own data center, building the public sector private cloud, and being able to aggregate, because this, you've now broken down all the boundaries and the access to services. And Lindiwe, I like what you say about opportunity and the availability of opportunity. But at Gajima, we are strong believers in creating the opportunity. And as we find ourselves in this mode 1, mode 2, looking at classic versus digital, we need to really, really be able to thrive in both these ecosystems. And this is where, as a service provider in this local market, we are very strong with our acquisition in both domains. We thrive in building the classic and maintaining the classic, but we don't marinate in this pot. We're able to take you out into mode 2 of where you need to participate. And we keep our customers at the heart of this, right? In being able to transform their businesses, whether it is in mining, manufacturing, and bringing robotics and artificial intelligence.
Guys, my mic. There's terrible feed.
For you? Can you still hear me?
Absolutely. I think we're just having some audio difficulties, but I think really capturing the essence of the conversation and moving from the acquisition conversation, I think, Tim, I'm going to stick to and call on to one of your profiles for the building of a digital leader in Africa. And that's looking at cross-functional collaboration, because something that we have had is this resurgence of corporate and startup engagement, right? And I think in that we've seen over $140 million just in the few months of 2021 being invested in African startups. And we're looking at the importance and the role of digital transformation in scaling these startups. And we know that small businesses across Africa contribute a huge component towards GDP. And I'm interested in your relationship with startups, what you've seen on the kinds of technologies, the kinds of interactions that we can expect on the ground to unlock this economic potential.
Thank you, Vuyo. Yes, indeed. I believe it's an exciting time for startups in Africa. And although there's a massive movement towards investments and supporting these startups, I still believe that it's a drop in the ocean as to what it can be, and certainly what it is overseas in some of the sort of first world countries. So I think if I had to put forward one recommendation, and this goes for any startups who are here today, as well as any corporates who are listening in, if there's one piece of advice that I can leave with you and that you take forward and bring into your workplace, it's to embrace ecosystem thinking. So we live in this age where there's always going to be someone smarter in the room, exponentially smarter than we are. And rather than trying to be everything to everyone, we need to create these ecosystems where we collaborate between corporates, between startups, the crowd, the gig economy, and start creating these powerful networks of problem solvers. So in my experience over the past 7 or so years, I've been fortunate enough to play the role of a bit of a strategic linchpin between corporates and startups. And some of the projects that I've been involved in have seen the likes of artificial intelligence startups transforming a customer insight and experience inside a bank or inside an insurance company. I've worked with Internet of Things companies, connecting many of the very fragmented components of a value chain within a mine or within a manufacturing environment. I've also worked with a lot of cloud startups who are creating these API platforms for some of our telcos and media companies. And I really observe that the magic happens where you have this opportunity for the corporate and the startup to work together and both learning from each other. So I've always said that there's this magic that happens because there's a bilateral learning opportunity that exists between corporates and startups. So on the one hand, you've got the startup. They need the business acumen, they need the strategic rigor, the access to market, some of the pragmatic processes that our corporates have developed over the years. But equally, on the other side, our corporates really need the agility. They need the innovation, the technical prowess in fields like artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud, Internet of Things. And this is what our startups are so good at doing organically and developing these skills rapidly. So yeah, I guess to cap it off, in my experience, the magic happens between these two parties, and we need to encourage our corporates and our startups to come together for those bilateral learning opportunities, because it's really the combination of these two players that represents such an enormous opportunity for untapped value in Africa's digital economy. And I look forward to working with some of these players to see how we solve some of the continent's greatest challenges.
Absolutely. I think it's been quite an expansive conversation, to say the least. And as we look to closing the discussion, I think my preparation to you was that we not only look at this headline, right? I think if you were given this headline that you were to communicate what exactly is your motivation for driving digital transformation in Africa, what would this headline be? Tim, I'm going to go back to you and then pass it over to Shapna and then Lindiwe before we invite to your closing remarks.
Thank you, Vuyo. I think my headline would be inspired by the late Clayton Christensen's book called The Prosperity Paradox, where he talks a lot about the creation of positive social economic uplift through sustainable innovation. And if I had to put it into a fewer words, I think it would read something like digital transformation, the great equalizer for the African economy.
Digital transformation, the great equalizer for the African economy. I absolutely love that. Shabna, we cross over to your headline. A paper lands on my doorstep, and the first thing I open is your headline. What does it read?
So for you, my headline would be Zero Unemployment in Africa, powered by Gajima, building inclusive digital economies.
Building inclusive digital economies. I absolutely love that. Lindiwe, what does your headline read?
Sure. I was trying to think. I'm it just shows that I wasn't that good in English in high school. But I think for me it would be, Africa being the innovative hub of the world. Yeah.
Africa, the innovative hub of the world. And as we welcome your closing remarks, a brief 1 minute to each of you. Lindiwe, I'm going to throw it back to you. This Africa that we're innovating, this Africa that we're capacitating, and in your particular role, responsible for the talent production that will take to the globe and will bring forth incredible creations. How do we foster that innovation?
I think we foster innovation through education, and then exposure, and then and inspiration. And what we need to do, and as early as possible, we need to make sure that we raise our children's aspirations. I think you and I are used to this quote for women in tech that you cannot become what you haven't seen. We need to really make sure that our children see and they meet people, so that they can start aspiring, to become actually, we needed to start thinking about what kind of Africa they want to see. And they can only do that if they understand where we are and how to get to where they should be. And they understand that they are basically the building tools that we need to change the story of Africa for the next generation.
The building tools needed to build back brilliantly the Africa that we required. Tim, what are your thoughts and your closing remarks on how we unlock this economic potential through digital transformation and perhaps other Tims that are currently in production?
Thank you, Vuya, and thanks, by the way. I've really enjoyed this discussion today. A lot of great takeaways for all of us. For me, I want to see more Africans supporting Africans. Let's come together and build this digital economy of the future, and to do it in a sustainable way. So what I really like to see is, sustainable positive impact through market creating innovations. And these are the types of initiatives, often the results of corporates working with startups, engaging with emerging technology that ends up upskilling our people, creating new jobs. We need to distribute wealth. We need to do more social good. And in doing so, sustainable economic growth would come. So I encourage our business leaders to approach digital transformation through this sort of lens of market creation and aim to empower Africa by building those new markets, solving new problems, accelerating the personal development of our people, and making sure that we're future fit at the end of the day. One of my areas of expertise is in platform businesses. And I always believe that we can apply this school of thought to create Africa's next platform hero that connects Africa to the global economy in a scalable, sustainable, and socio-economically impactful way. So my challenge would be, let's build the next Amazon. Let's build the next Tesla. Let's build the next Netflix of Africa, from Africans supporting Africans.
Absolutely. And to your point, Tim, not letting COVID be the disruptor, but essentially being prepared enough with the capacity to be able to do that. Shabna, your role, you're responsible with Gajima of creating this market, creating innovations and the infrastructure that is important so that we can unlock this economic potential. Your closing comments?
Thank you, Vuyo. So for me, at Gajima, we strongly believe in the only moment that matters is this moment. And as a nation, let us unshackle ourselves from where we are to where we want to be. And everything is possible. If you think it, you can do it. And at Gajima, we have shown that we have the tenacity as a very proudly African company to reach for the stars and to deliver world-class services across the continent. We've created the platforms. It's happening. There is no reason to wait. It is happening. Let us not look at the shackles, but let us look at the possibility of unleashing the potential and the hunger of the innovation that sits inside the continent to find its rightful place and claim its seat at the world economy. That would be my closing comments.
Beautiful way to close off this panel discussion. And I think in closing this expectation gap as well, it's quite clear that there needs to be this capacity for not only capital investments, but the human development and the broad spectrum of capable infrastructure and these key strategic conversations and collaborations that need to take place. A huge thank you to our panelists for joining us today. And if I do say so myself, Africa is truly in great hands. An engaging conversation indeed, and we thank our panelist Shabna Harilal, who is the Managing Director at Gajima Technology Services, Tim Mitchell, who heads up digital transformation at Flux Labs, and Lindiwe Matlali, the founder and CEO at Africa Teen Geeks. An African city that has been a leading tech hub in Africa for startups is Cape Town. And if you're the tech fundi, then you'll know it by the name that has been given by the tech community, and that is Silicon Cape. To provide an evaluation of the ecosystem and the strategic initiatives that the city has undertaken to establish this economic growth, please welcome to the Tech Talk stage, James Milner, the co-director at Silicon Cape.
It's my pleasure today to speak through the case study looking at the Cape Town Stockholm Connect initiative on behalf of Silicon Cape. But as you'll see as I talk through this case study, there really are a lot of interesting stakeholders involved in this project. So just to start things off, who is Silicon Cape? Well, Silicon Cape is a non-profit community-driven initiative that focuses on catalyzing the tech ecosystem here in South Africa. It was founded in 2009 and is now known as the most established entrepreneurial network in Africa. Broadly speaking, our vision is to develop the Western Cape as an innovation hub for the continent and also enable an inclusive tech ecosystem. A lot of our work is centered around connecting stakeholders to resources and each other for mutual benefit, curating communities and networks, and then also telling the good stories of what's taking place here on the continent and in terms of the startups that we work with. Just a quick look at our current leadership. So we've got Dr. Sumeri Root, who has worked extensively in the educational space, currently working at UCT. Zimkita Bua, who has significant corporate experience, currently working at Dimension Data. And then myself working within the governmental space at a company called Westgrow. I think what's really interesting about the current leadership is that it gives us a triple helix model where we can tap into different components of key ecosystems in terms of education, business, and also government. What's also very exciting is that we recently announced a month ago the fact that we're going to onboard Vusi Tembekwayo, who will be bringing his wealth of entrepreneurial experience to the board. So some very exciting developments taking place. A note as well to touch on our strategic implementation partners, the Loudhailer. The Loudhailer is a strategic PR and communications firm that has deep experience looking at tech ecosystems both in South Africa and across the African continent. I think a very interesting component about Silicon Cape as an entity is that it's an entity that was founded by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, and it's a very interesting story. In 2009, Vinnie and Justin were building their businesses in Cape Town, and they found that they were struggling to understand who else was doing similar things and who else they could maybe be working with. And so they formed Silicon Cape with the idea of connecting people across the Cape in terms of tech and entrepreneurial work to better communicate and do work with one another. And I think what's really amazing is that they, as individual entrepreneurs, have become globally recognized leaders in various initiatives. Vinnie was on South Africa's vision of Dragon's Den and is now doing some interesting work in the crypto space in Silicon Valley. Justin has formed 40i Capital and is really doing some exciting and interesting work in the venture capital space. So again, I think it's really exciting that Silicon Cape was built by such incredible entrepreneurs. Just looking at Silicon Cape's partners and members on an ongoing basis, Silicon Cape works with entities across the spectrum. So the company works with big corporates like Standard Bank. It works with governmental entities like Wesgrow. It works with foreign companies like foreign entities like Hamburg at Work and French South Africa Tech Labs, and also exciting and innovative conferences and exhibitions like Africa Arena. And I think what's important about looking at some of these stakeholders, just the snapshot of stakeholders, is Silicon Cape's ability to bring entities together for the benefit of the tech ecosystem. So to get to the meat of this conversation, the Cape Town Stockholm Connect initiative, I think it's important to first lay a platform in terms of the two respective spaces. So number one, Stockholm, widely recognized as a highly exciting innovation ecosystem, home to, or what they say, for every 1,000 employees in Sweden, there are 20 startups, with Stockholm being referred to as Europe's unicorn factory. And I think many people will recognize the billion-dollar companies that have been built out of Sweden, companies like Spotify, Skype, and King, which built Candy Crush. So a really exciting and innovative ecosystem that's been developing in Stockholm. Cape Town has recently launched the brand Africa's Tech Capital in reference to the fact that the city is really growing an exciting and innovative local tech ecosystem, but in a sense which has been under-recognized globally in terms of its strength on the African continent, even though a recent Endeavour research report found that Cape Town's tech ecosystem is one of the most productive on the continent, employing more than 40,000 people. Cape Town's also home to some really exciting exits and startups, businesses like Get Smarter, Jumo, Yoko, Sweep South, and I think, very interestingly, the home and the headquarters of Naspers, which is now one of the 10 largest tech investors on the globe. So I think just taking a quick snapshot look at both of these ecosystems gives an idea of what's evolving here, that there's a really exciting potential for both of these ecosystems to actually be connecting with one another. So how did this initiative come together? Well, I think the first component is to acknowledge the importance of stakeholder collaboration. And in this process, there were a wide range of stakeholders that came together. Certainly, it's worth recognizing the City of Cape Town, the work of Business Sweden, Wesgrow, Silicon Cape, the Swedish Embassy, and the Loudhailer. These were the entities that were involved in bringing this concept together, connecting with one another, and mapping out what this process would be. I think what is also important to recognize is that this process happened during COVID-19. So a lot of work was undertaken to understand what would be the best way of rolling out such an initiative and making sure that it worked. Although the process was run out relatively fast, it still needed to be adapted on a constant basis to make sure that the plans were adapted to travel restrictions and that the objectives could be delivered virtually. Ultimately, the core objective of this initiative was reaching the community. So really tapping into the individuals in the ecosystems on both sides in both cities and really ensuring that there's a longevity to this process. So those were the three fundamentals that this process was built around. Phase one. So phase one was the initial launch event, and the main objective of the launch was to bring together companies, developers, customers, investors, entrepreneurs, and institutions to talk about opportunities in South Africa and Sweden. And the very first step here was putting together a webinar, which took place on February the 10th, 2021. And basically what the webinar featured was a diverse group of speakers from both the private sector and from government, really sharing their insights about the landscape and opportunities that were prevalent in terms of each place. And so what was really fascinating about the webinar was the ability for different people to present their insights, particularly from private sector players, around what they thought could be an opportunity for other entrepreneurs sitting in the other city, and perhaps how they could best connect. In terms of the webinar itself, it really had a good reach. So in terms of shared impressions, it reached more than 10 million people. It generated an AVE of more than R1 million. But I think what's also important is that the webinar allowed an opportunity and an initial forum for people to come together and talk about what they saw this initiative becoming. So this is really still very much phase one. And I think what was really recognized is that the partnership that's being built here presents, number one, an opportunity to utilize the power of cross-border city-to-city collaboration, not only to scale technology and build exciting new companies, but also to simultaneously create socio-economic growth and jobs across both regions. There's also been some work around estimating what potential deal flow could happen, and the initial numbers say that there's potential to create up to 10 million euros in technology transfer between 20 mid to late stage tech companies that have been recognized through and identified through this partnership. So subsequent to the webinar, Silicon Cape developed a dedicated landing page for this initiative, which is still available on the Silicon Cape website, and also implemented a post-event attendee survey to refine the process moving forward. And I think what's quite interesting from that survey process is that a lot of the entities and participants that were surveyed spoke about the value of having a follow-on B2B engagement. So really taking things from a platform where it was a webinar where people talked about the potential opportunities and actually moving to a space where companies are able to engage with one another directly and talk about what they could do together or what they could build together. So I think one critical takeaway is forming the follow-on B2B engagements. What was also recognized by participants is that the city-to-city collaboration allows for some opening of niche opportunities in accessing large ecosystems in different areas. And I think what's really interesting about this process is that the opportunity for replication of these structures, between city-to-city partnerships, and particularly for Cape Town to look at other opportunities like this across the globe is really quite exciting. Finally, participants recognize the value in the public-private partnership that could unlock significant opportunities for businesses going forward, particularly in terms of the ease of doing business. So when companies are looking to land in a particular city, working through this partnership could potentially provide them with a much easier and faster landing space than if they'd been doing it alone. So to end off just on the next steps, I think I've touched on this before, but this is very much seen as a phase one of the initiative. And so it really was setting the ground and the platform for building a longer term process and really bringing the project to life over a longer period of time, 6 months to at least a year for phases 2 and 3. And based on various discussions with the participants and stakeholders that I outlined earlier, and obviously in accordance with the restrictions of COVID-19, a few concepts that have been put on the table in terms of follow-ups for phases 2 and 3 is follow-up webinars that are focusing on B2B engagements and structured breakaways as recommended by the participants. And really what everyone is keen to do is also set up in-country visits by business and startup delegations. So these would be facilitated in-country visits for business delegations and startups to come and see the cities, immerse themselves and really get an understanding for what's happening in the city. And then finally, one critical and sort of major step that can potentially be unlocked is looking at a dedicated space within each city to facilitate soft landings and enhance collaboration through this partnership. So a lot of quite interesting outcomes in terms of the next steps, and certainly I, for one, am very hopeful about what could happen in phases 2 and 3 of this initiative. That's me taking you through the case study. Thank you very much for your time.
That was James Milner, the co-director at Silicon Cape, engaging at what makes my hometown, Cape Town, the rivaled Silicon Cape that it is, and a leading Africa tech powerhouse. Our next Tech Talk explores the touchpad of why competitive markets like Silicon Cape exist. And a key point owing to this is the foreign direct investment that is being driven and channeled towards African development through technology and digital transformation. Leading this discussion is Yemi Keri, the CEO of Hekabela and the co-founder of Rising Tide Africa, and facilitated by Carla Fletcher, the marketing director at Topco Media.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Fireside Chats with Yemi Keri. She is one of the foremost women in technology in Nigeria. She is the CEO of Hekabela and the co-founder of Rising Tide Africa. Welcome, Kemi.